the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, appears to be at war with itself. Lucanio talking about the strength of these unions. Factional battles and infighting have marred the union for months now. Last month, Numsa proceeding with their elective conference despite a court interdict. Let's get some perspective now, and we're joined by the union's former Deputy General Secretary, Karl Cloete, who joins us via the virtual platform. Mr. Cloete, thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with the march that is unfolding today, this national shutdown. Both COSATU and SAFTU pulling together here. How important is that? And if I remember correctly, in my reporting days, there used to be the saying that one country, one labor federation. Is that key today? I think you have... there we go. Now I hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, and good morning to your viewers. I think there are probably two critical points to make about the shutdown today. The first is that workers, the working class and the rural poor had been brutalized over time by capital and by the state, and we can see this in the high levels of unemployment, deepening levels of inequality. We can see this in the money that gets stolen that is meant for service delivery. And so it is critically important to come to my second point, that the unity of workers must be going beyond slogans, beyond logos and so on. And therefore it is a hopeful sign that SAFTU and COSATU has joined forces to demonstrate against what workers and the working class are confronted with.
Yeah, let's talk about your former home, Numsa. It is the biggest union in the country in terms of its size and indeed the workers it organizes. SAFTU was very clear. This is now the federation that it belongs to. They have made their reasons for why they cannot help financially in mobilizing for today's national shutdown. How should we read that as ordinary South Africans?
Well, Numsa is the biggest union in South Africa, but it's also the biggest union on the continent. Numsa has a very proud 35-year-old history of militancy, of worker control, of democracy internally in the union. And it is quite painful and sad to sit on the outside and to see the spectacle. What I find particularly strange is the reasoning for why Numsa would not have gone all out to ensure that their federation, SAFTU, brings out workers in numbers. In other words, I understand that millions would have gone into the 11th National Congress. People say about 39 million. But, there are things like strike funds that Numsa has. And, of course, the strike fund has a particular purpose which is aimed at industry and sector strikes in Numsa. Also, there is a provision that it be contained to build up the fund. But there are various ways in which Numsa could have provided resources. So your foot soldiers, literally as I understand it, has to do mobilization work without resources.
And does that talk to these divisions that we saw playing out, Mr. Cloete, both in the lead up to the SAFTU Congress and subsequent to that, the Numsa 11th Congress that you speak about? Because there have been clear divisions, and part of the talk, especially in the lead up to the Federation's Congress, was that there does seem to be a push for Zwelinzima Vavi to not come back, particularly from within the ranks of Numsa. Some leaders there, we were made to understand that this had to do with Mr. Vavi potentially working with those in his former home in Kosatu to try and return this federation back to that fold. Where exactly do these divisions emanate? And are we reading the situation correctly, as I've put it to you?
Well, I think you're correct. I think that one day, Irvin Jim and Zwelinzima focus into their confidence to tell us what exactly the nature of the conflict and tension is between the two of them. Of course, it is unfortunate that this is reduced to individuals and not organizations, but I think that individuals, as powerful as they are, the following that they carry, individuals plays an important role in any struggle in any country. My own observation is that these tensions are deeply political and ideologically driven. I think that there is huge differences with respect to the politics as it plays itself out in South Africa. I think ideologically the two do not see eye to eye as to the strategic objectives of how to advance a socialist struggle or socialist revolution, and therefore they differ on tactics. But that's me. They will have to come clear and clean as to why do we see what's happening. I mean, the SAFTU Second National Congress was a disaster from the point of view that Numsa was instrumental to be a catalyst for the formation of SAFTU. And yet, if we follow the trends and if we follow what's happening, it's almost as if there is a very serious attempt to collapse SAFTU. What the reason would be, your guess is as good as mine.
I can't not miss, I can't miss this opportunity, Mr. Cloete, to ask you, as a former insider in Numsa, about what you have written about in the last few months or so, and you continue to write about it, by the way, the phenomenon called business unionism. And my question to you is, how rife is it within Numsa as a person who was inside that union at the top leadership structure? And also, importantly, link that response to the question of accountability by those who are at the helm of the union, particularly when it comes to the union's investment arm.
Thank you for an important question. The first thing I should say is that a colleague of mine is doing wonderful research on the crisis that investment companies have created in many different unions. And I hope before the end of this year, her research results would become known, because this is a bigger problem beyond Numsa. You would have knowledge of how Sipau got to be placed under administration, because Sipau had a investment arm to the value of about 8 billion rand. It cannot be explained how the 8 billion got reduced to 1.8 billion. Well, I hope the research will clarify that. Inside of Numsa, what I find very disingenuous by the national leadership of Numsa is that in 2008, just before we went to the 8th National Congress, where we were elected, in September of that year in East London, Numsa had an important special National Executive Committee meeting to take stock of what was happening in the investment company at the time. And there was a resolution in that special National Executive Committee that the CEO at the time, Mr. Tony Gobe, should be suspended, a forensic investigation should be undertaken, and that if there's any guilt on his part, that he should be dismissed. Well, the forensic investigation was launched by the appointment of E&S attorneys. The findings were made known, which resulted in the dismissal of Mr. Gobe. Fast forward, these workers and leaders in Numsa, 53 of them that got suspended, were asking a simple question. And the simple question was, if the Numsa investment company has borrowed money which stands at 136 million today, which they got from subscriptions, why can the money not be repaid when in fact we see executives in that Numsa investment company paying themselves preferential shares of 95 million? And I think all sorts of lies are dressed up like a Christmas tree to suggest that these individuals in Numsa are doing this for a very dirty agenda when only they want accountability.
Karl Cloete, we're going to have to leave the conversation there because that's part of the bigger question as to whether or not today's national shutdown is going to be a success or not. What contributes to the weakening state of unions in our country, and might that be part of the problem, that workers' monies are being siphoned for whatever ends? Karl Cloete continues to write about this. We'll continue to talk to him for as long as he makes himself available. Thank you very much for your time.